This is the house that I grew up at. And the question for today is, can you really go home? Stay tuned. Well, in my case, I can physically go home, but it doesn't necessarily mean I can get to that place of innocence I had when I was a child. But one of the things that reminds me of those times is this, the Hermes 10. This particular typewriter is our family typewriter. My dad bought this typewriter for my oldest brother in about 1971. That's the same year this was manufactured. It is a Hermes 10 Type R electric, wide carriage, very similar to the Hermes 3000 in terms of layout and features. And he bought it from Duke City Typewriter here in Albuquerque. There's a price tag sticker still on the side of the typewriter indicating $295, which if you consider the 1971 value of the US dollar really amounts to quite a bit more money right now. Let's take a look at the Hermes Model 10. Stay tuned. Well, our father bought this typewriter for my oldest brother, but when he graduated from school, my middle brother used it, and then I used it being the youngest kid. I remember writing a number of essays and term papers on this, including that famous 20-page essay on the revival of the rigid airship. Yeah, that was interesting. But I remember that this sat on a hard desk, and our house had hard floors, and this machine was quite loud. And I don't remember it at the time being a wide carriage machine. It didn't strike me as that, and because I didn't know the difference. And in fact, for years, decades after I had last used this in the early 1970s, I always pictured this machine as more of a standard width carriage, just because I didn't know any better. It wasn't until maybe 2008 or 2010 or something like that, maybe a little bit later than that, that I actually asked my oldest brother to drag it out of the closet and let me take a look at it again. And I was surprised to find, hey, it's actually a little bit bigger than I thought it was. And yeah, it is a little loud. The motor makes a little bit of a humming noise, and it's the typical Type R electric in the sense of a very energetic typing action and a powered carriage return. This machine, though, brings back a lot of memories about typing. I was going to typing class probably in 10th grade and began using this machine at home to kind of reinforce my typing skills. So it's interesting, when I first got interested in typewriters as an adult back 2007 maybe time frame, I didn't really think I was interested in Type R electric machines. Certainly wasn't interested in daisy-wheeled or electronic typewriters at the time. But only recently, as you've followed this channel, have you noticed that I've gotten a little more interested in electric typewriters, Type R electrics notably. And so this typewriter promises to be a pretty darn good Type R electric just because its heritage is based on the Hermes 3000 chassis. Well, if you start with the keyboard, over here on the far left side, here's a feature that the Hermes 3000 doesn't have. That's right, a power switch and a little neon bulb indicating the power is on. And you can probably hear, perhaps, the motor humming. So it's a standard American-style keyboard with a number 1 exclamation mark, plus and equals, shift and shift lock, and the shifting is power assisted. So you can see the buttons pressed down, but the actual segment doesn't shift until the power is on, like that. Up above here, these 6 buttons should be very reminiscent to anybody who owns a Hermes 3000. You have the tabulator button itself, the backspace button, which, by the way, is driven by the powered spindle. It's not mechanically linked directly to the escapement, so you have to have the power on for the backspace to work. Tab set, tab clear, all clear, margin release. Very, very similar to a Hermes 3000. Here's your ribbon color selector. It's the same kind of a layout, or similar to it. You have the stencil position on the bottom, and then the ribbon top, ribbon middle, and ribbon bottom settings. Over here is the copy set or copy control, which is in the same location as the touch selector is on the manual Hermes 3000. But what it has instead is the touch selector is over here on the right side next to the carriage return button, which, yes, a carriage return button. It is a powered carriage return. The right side of the carriage should look pretty familiar to you Hermes 3000 users. So you have the platinum knob. You notice the knob is a different shape. It's more of a conical, ridged knob that sticks out further than the standard Hermes 3000 knob. Here you have the carriage release button right here. Above that is the pressure roller, feed roller release for the paper release, and then underneath it is the classic Hermes 3000 margin setting button, and underneath there you might notice the price tag of $295 US in 1971 dollars. That's right. Up here is the paper bail, which you might notice is a pretty standard looking Hermes 3000 paper bail, including this little finger support, this little tab for lifting up the paper bail, the scale along the paper bail, and the rubber rollers. All standard Hermes 3000 features. And might I add, of course, the paper fingers in the back of the machine are classic Hermes 3000 paper fingers. And one other feature that you may or may not have on your Hermes 3000 are these two little rubber bumpers for when you lower down the paper fingers, they don't scratch the body of the typewriter. And yeah, here is the label. Duke City Typewriter, Hermes Dealer Sales Service Rentals, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Of course, they're not around anymore. And now we get to the left side of the carriage, where you have your carriage line spacing selector up here, 1, 1.5, and 2 line spacing. Again, the platinum knob is different shaped than on the manual Hermes, and you have the left-hand margin setting lever, but you'll notice there is no left-hand margin release button. Isn't that interesting, huh? Yeah, only the right side of the carriage has a margin release button. Now, a careful observation here will show you that. Under the left-hand carriage side bracket is this little notch in here, and you might be able to see this tiny little roller with a drawband on it, and that's the draw cord that does the carriage return and line feed. That drawband threads over to the right side of the carriage and down into the chassis, and there is a clutch on the right-hand side of the drive spindle that is activated when you hit a carriage return, and that is what pulls the carriage back to the right, to the left margin position. And looking under the left side of the carriage, you can see that plastic roller and the drawband that does the pulling back of the carriage during the powered carriage return cycle. And underneath the right side of the carriage area, you see this plastic pulley or roller. That's where that drawband threads through underneath and then back behind the right side of the machine to the spindle. And that particular drawband is different than the drawband for the spring motor. The spring motor drawband being attached under the right side of the carriage here. Here's the drawband itself that goes back to the spring motor that actually provides tension on the carriage during the actual typing action. And of course, the other notable feature on this typewriter is going to be the power cord itself, and a nice little strain relief bracket underneath here, and a nice long cord. You don't see that on a manual Hermes 3000, no sir. And yes, just like the Hermes 3000 manual typewriter, this has the magic margin-like margin settings here you can see with the red ribbon in the paper bail. How I can adjust the left margin using the left margin setting and the right-hand carriage release button. Now, despite the similarities with the manual Hermes 3000, you might notice when I remove the ribbon cover that the segment area is a different shape. It doesn't have that kind of S-curve or whatever kind of a curve that the Hermes 3000 does. This is a more conventional semicircular type bar arrangement. But other than that, it's essentially the same. It has the similar kind of tension levers on the ribbon spools, the same kind of auto-reversing guides, ribbon vibrator, the shape of the segment here, the slots and all that, the way this is curved, it's all essentially the same, even down to the clear card guides. Being a Type R electric, these have certain keys that auto-repeat, notably the X, the period, the dash, and the space bar. The backspace doesn't auto-repeat. You have to do it once for every time you want a backspace. And of course there's the powered carriage return. The tabulator is completely manual. In fact, you can set the tabs but just by moving the carriage and setting them with the power off. It has a tabulator brake system similar to the 3000, like that, so the carriage doesn't overspeed and slam against the hard stop. And yet another Hermes 3000-like feature is the little notch in here, which serves as the end of paper indicator if you have the edge of the paper lined up with this notch when you start. The left carriage knob pulls out to permanently adjust the line spacing. Whereas the line spacing selector, if you push it up above 1, you have a temporary adjustment of the line spacing. It just releases the clutch. Go back to the indexed line spacing, you're back to the same index position. One of the main differences between a Type R electric and a manual machine is how far you have to push the keys before you get the printing action to happen. So let's turn on the machine and let's just press the C key, for instance. It's not much. It's hardly a half a centimeter, which makes it a very nice machine for rapid typing. So one of the things about Type R electrics that at times the keys can get too sensitive because the key travel is so short. Well, there is a touch selector, so if you put it on 1, you can feel there's a lot less pre-tensioning. It's a lot easier to push the key. All the way up to 4, it's definitely harder. You can't easily push it without feeling some resistance. So in this case, I kind of like this machine with the touch a little bit heavier. It makes it less likely that I'm going to miss-hit the keys. And of course, one of the very best things I like about Type R electric machines is the apostrophe is lowercase and it's 2 keys over from the L instead of being a shifted 8. Why is that important? Well, as I've described many times, if you're writing fiction where there's a lot of dialogue and characters in dialogue typically are written to be using colloquial terms that may use contractions, and contractions require apostrophes. It's just a lot easier to get those there lowercase than shifted 8 like on manual typewriters. The art of writing, taking intimate thoughts and creating words and sentences out of them, is a very personal art, a very personal activity. It's not always something that you share with other people, but you often do. There is the idea of home as being very personal, very internalized. And I think it's kind of difficult to separate the idea of home as a physical location from home being those intimate, private things that we do in our own mind. I feel at times like I carry my home around with me, like the turtle shell idea. You know, this is kind of home, right? I mean, I have a home right now, physically, a family that lives in this house, but home is kind of in the heart and in the head, and that has a lot to do with creativity and writing and words and how important they are to us. So it's all kind of intermingled and mixed up and jumbled in some way, but I get the sense that I can return home, whatever that place is, internal to me, more through the art of writing and words than any other means, even photography. And so a machine like this is a conduit for going back to that place, especially since I used this machine so much when I was a kid. And yet, I think there's still more to this than mere sentimentality. I think it goes much deeper than that with a machine like this and how you can create with it. And especially considering this was the machine that unlocked the formative years of my creativity, my discovery of the writing process. A Type R electric machine isn't a very romantic machine. It's not black lacquered with round chromed keys, for instance. And it could have been a plastic wedge daisy wheel typewriter if I was born a decade later. It's less about the machine itself than about what it represents, I think, as a doorway to unleashing one's creativity. Well, if you guys have any questions about the Hermes 10, drop me a note down below. I'd love to talk with you about it. And also, do you have a family typewriter that you grew up with that you still have? I'd like to hear that story also. Why don't you share it down below? Well, I wish you the very best. Stay well, stay healthy, stay creative. Have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.